On November 4th, 2012, millions across the world tuned in to watch the first Coptic papal election of the 21st century. For the Copts, this was a tense event in which the Church was praying deeply for the election of a righteous father to succeed the long and fruitful tenure of the much-beloved Pope Shenouda III of thrice-blessed memory. For those outside the Church, however, the event was special in that it provided a unique insight into the election of the Coptic Pope, who, unlike the Pope of Rome, was not elected by cardinals behind closed doors, but rather was selected through a lottery process involving a young child drawing his name from a glass bowl in the middle of Egypt's largest cathedral and in front of thousands. The unique and public nature of this event garnered much attention from foreign media at the time, and exposed millions of non-Copts to this peculiar tradition of the Coptic Church. But how did this strange tradition come about? And has it always been the method used for Coptic papal elections? This video will answer those questions and more. The method currently in use in the Coptic Church for papal elections is the casting of lots. However, this is not the only method that the Church has employed historically. There have been 4 different methods through which Coptic popes have been regularly selected throughout history. These include election by the casting of lots, appointment or endorsement by the predecessor, election by the Alexandrian presbyters, and election by consensus among the clergy and laity. In addition to these regular methods of election, some Coptic popes have also been irregularly appointed through divine intervention via a sign or a vision, the laity acting alone, the bishops acting alone, or through government interference. It is important to note that none of these methods were mutually exclusive, but rather that at times multiple methods would be employed in unison at different stages of the election process. For example, a pope could be endorsed by their predecessor and then elected officially via a consensus among the clergy and laity. Out of the 118 Coptic popes, 93 of them were elected through these recorded methods, while the remaining 25 do not have sufficient records detailing the process of their election. With this in mind, let's explore these different methods for papal elections. The oldest recorded method for papal elections is the casting of lots. This method for election has its roots in both biblical and patristic practices. Throughout the Bible, the casting of lots was not seen simply as a tool for random selection by chance, but rather as a tool for declaring the divine will. For example, we see in the book of Joshua that the casting of lots was used in dividing up the land between the tribes of Israel. Also in the story of Jonah, the sailors cast lots to know which of the ship's passengers had caused the storm. Most importantly, we see that the high priest of Israel was chosen through the casting of lots, and that priests were also selected to perform certain rites within the temple through the casting of lots. It is for this reason that when the apostles wanted to select a replacement for Judas, they cast lots between Matthias and Joseph, and God, through the lots, chose Matthias as the new apostle. Likewise, the traditions of the Church inform us that the apostles cast lots between them to learn of their preaching assignments, and that St. Mark's lot fell upon Egypt and Africa, and thus he went to preach in Alexandria, becoming the first patriarch of the Coptic Church. The casting of lots was also mentioned as the method used for the election of the 4th Pope, Serdo, less than 60 years after its implementation by the apostles. The second instance for the use of this method does not appear, however, until the election of John VII, the 48th Patriarch, nearly 600 years later. In that election, there was no clear consensus between the electors on whom they should appoint as Patriarch, and so they deferred to casting lots. The name of each candidate was written on a small piece of paper, and the papers were placed in a vessel on the altar. The congregation and bishops then prayed and chanted, "Lord have mercy," and then a young child picked out a name from the vessel. The lot was performed 3 times, and each time, the name of John VII was chosen, proving that he was God's choice for patriarch. It is likely that this form of altar lot had already been in use for some of the 25 unknown cases. This is evidenced by the fact that while this is only its second mentioned use in the existing sources, the passage introduces it as an already commonplace practice and refers to the process in a habitual sense. The casting of lots would also be used for the election of Michael V, the 71st Patriarch, and John the 17th, the 105th Patriarch. It is likely that this method was most commonly implemented in the Middle Ages as a sort of tiebreaker, for when the electors couldn't reach a consensus on any of the candidates. The Holy Synod in 1957, however, redeveloped it into the official way for all future papal elections. Under the new bylaws, which they established at that time, Following the death of the Pope, the bishops and the lay leaders of the Church would nominate a long list of suitable candidates. This list would then be thinned down by the Holy Synod to a short list of 5 to 7 candidates. An electoral college consisting of the bishops and representatives of the priests, monastics, diaconate, and laity from all the dioceses would then be gathered to vote on these candidates. The 3 with the highest votes would then have their names placed in the altar lot, and a young child would choose from among them the name of the new patriarch. While this process had been slightly amended through the years, with its most recent amendment being in 2014, its bold points have stayed the same. This modernized version of the altar law was used for electing the 3 most recent patriarchs, Pope Kyrillos VI, Pope Shenouda III, and Pope Tawadros II. The second oldest method for patriarchal election is appointment or endorsement by the predecessor. The first recorded use of this method was the appointment of Pope Inianus, the second patriarch, by St. Mark. St. Mark needed to ordain a trustworthy and faithful leader to care for the newly founded Church of Alexandria while he went on to preach in other regions, and so he appointed St. Inianus as bishop and entrusted to him the care of Alexandria. This was a common practice for the apostles in the first century, as we see St. Paul doing the same thing with St. Timothy and St. Titus. The second use of this method comes from the election of Pope Peter the Seal of Martyrs, the 17th Pope. He was the son of an Alexandrian priest and was under the personal and pastoral care of Pope Theonas. Before his departure, Pope Theonas gathered the laity and clergy of Alexandria and instructed them that his spiritual son and disciple, Peter, is to succeed him as patriarch. Also worthy of note is Peter II, the 21st Patriarch, who was designated by his eminent predecessor St. Athanasius the Apostolic, the 20th Patriarch. The election of a candidate based on the endorsement of their predecessor was also used in the elections of Pope Benjamin I, the 38th Patriarch, Pope Agathon I, the 39th Patriarch, Pope John III, the 40th Patriarch, Pope Mark II, the 49th Patriarch, and Pope James I, the 50th Patriarch. The last time this method was employed was for the election of Pope Gabriel V, the 88th Patriarch, nearly 6 centuries ago. This method was most commonly used during times of political and theological turbulence, in order to ensure that the incoming patriarch was a disciple of the previous one and would maintain and defend their theologically orthodox position. The third oldest method for Coptic papal elections was the election of the Pope by the Alexandrian presbyters. This method has its roots in the fact that the Coptic Pope is the Bishop of Alexandria, and that for the first 2 centuries Christianity had not been widely practiced in Egypt outside of that city. In that early phase of the Church, the Bishop of Alexandria was the only bishop in all of Egypt, and he was the head of the Alexandrian Clerical Council, an early prototype of the Holy Synod consisting of 12 presbyters, which assisted the Pope in governing the Church. When the Pope died, these 12 presbyters would be responsible for electing and ordaining the new Pope, and often elected a successor from among themselves. Popes who had been elected in this fashion include Pope Primus, the 5th Patriarch, Pope Heracles, the 13th Patriarch, Pope Dioscorus I, the 25th Patriarch, and Pope Peter IV, the 34th Patriarch. The next electoral method we will discuss is election via general consensus among the clergy and laity. This has been the most common method used throughout the Church's history, accounting for the election of at least 45 popes. The details of the process were not usually recorded, and as expected, they varied from one patriarch to another. This method was used in the elections of Pope Claudian, the 9th Patriarch, Pope Julian, the 11th Patriarch, and St. Athanasius the Apostolic, the 20th Patriarch. During the medieval period, a tradition arose in which the laity and the clergy of Alexandria and Cairo would take turns in assisting the bishops in the election of the Pope. A clear example of this practice can be seen in the elections of Pope Christodoulos I, the 66th Patriarch, who was elected by the help of the Alexandrians, and the election of Pope Cyril II, the 67th Patriarch, who was elected with the help of the Cyrenes. At the start of the 20th century, the Church sought to standardize the process of election, and so the Holy Synod established regulations for an electoral college. This electoral college would be composed of bishops and representatives of the clergy and laity from each diocese. Such an electoral college was used in the elections of Pope John XIX, the 113th Patriarch, Pope Macarius III, the 114th, and Pope Euseb II, the 115th Patriarch. As mentioned earlier, this electoral college is still used in the preliminary portion of modern Coptic papal elections, prior to the casting of lots between the final candidates. Now that we've discussed the typical methods of election for the Pope, let's address the abnormal methods through which some popes were elected in the past. The first type of unusual election we will discuss is that through divine intervention. The first example of this is the election of Pope Demetrius the Vine-Dresser, the 12th Patriarch. His predecessor, Pope Julian, had a dream in which an angel foretold him that his successor would come to him in the morning and bring him a cluster of grapes. This was improbable because grapes were out of season. The next day, Demetrius, who was a vine-dresser, found a ripe cluster of grapes in his field, and since this was the first fruit, he took it to the church as a gift for the Pope. The Pope then took hold of Demetrius and called all the clergy and the laity to the church and announced to them the vision he had had the night before, explaining that after he passes away, Demetrius must become Pope. On that very day, Pope Julian died and Pope Demetrius was consecrated as the new Patriarch. The next Patriarch to be elected through divine intervention was Pope Chael I, the 46th Patriarch. During that election, the bishops and delegates gathered in Alexandria to elect the Patriarch, but they were unable to unanimously agree on any candidate. One of the deacons in attendance had a dream where an angel instructed him to nominate Pope Chael. The deacon did so, and the committee agreed to elect him unanimously. The next miraculous election was that of Pope Zacharias, the 64th Patriarch. During that election, the delegates had gathered in Alexandria, but were undecided on a candidate. The electing council then received news that a rich merchant had donated money to the ruler, Al-Hakim Ba'amrillah, to secure a decree appointing himself as Patriarch. While they were discussing what to do, Zacharias, who was a humble priest, went to retrieve a jar of vinegar from the top of the church where the meeting was held. As he was coming down the ladder, he slipped and fell, but both he and the jar were unharmed. The council saw this as a miracle and a sign for them to elect him. They hastened to consecrate him as pope before the merchant arrived from Cairo with the caliphal decree. In retaliation for this unauthorized consecration, the caliph decreed the destruction of churches throughout the country, imprisoned Pope Zacharias for 3 months, and even twice ordered him thrown to the lions. Each time, however, the saintly patriarch was miraculously saved. Finally, Pope Benjamin II, the 82nd Patriarch, was elected based on a prophecy by Saint Barsoom the Naked. Shortly before his death, Saint Barsoom had prophesied that the monk Benjamin would be elected as a pope. When the electors were informed of this prophecy, there was no opposition from the clergy or the laity, and so Pope Benjamin was elected and consecrated. Throughout the history of the Church, there were also a few occasions where the laity alone elected the pope, and the clergy simply consecrated whomever the lay leaders chose. This seems to have been the case for Pope Avilius, the 3rd Patriarch, for whom it is mentioned that the Orthodox people assembled and consulted together, then took him and elected him as Patriarch on the episcopal throne of St. Mark the Evangelist in place of Pope Inianus. A similar process in which the laity chose the Pope and the bishops simply ordained him is mentioned for the election of Pope Alexander I, the 19th Patriarch. Similarly, the same thing was done for Pope Cosmas I, the 44th Patriarch, Pope Gabriel II, the 70th Patriarch, Pope John VI, the 74th Patriarch, Pope John XVI, the 103rd Patriarch, and Pope Peter VI, the 104th Patriarch. Not surprisingly, in many of these cases, the laity occasionally elected a layman or a deacon instead of a priest or a monk. One example of this is John VI, the 74th Patriarch, who was a layman before his consecration. In a few of these cases, the sources specifically mention that it was the archons, or the lay leaders of the church, rather than simply the people, who elected the patriarch. This is most significant with regard to the elections that took place in the 17th and 18th centuries, when the Coptic archons were the de facto leaders of the community, as the role of bishops and priests had been curtailed simply to the performance of sacraments. In contrast to the election by laity alone, there exists one instance in the historical sources of the Coptic Church where the bishops elected the patriarch with no indication of participation by either the presbyters or the laity. This occurred in the election of Pope Euseb I, the 52nd Patriarch. Finally, let us address the role government intervention has played in some Coptic papal elections. When the Roman Empire embraced Christianity as a state religion in 380 AD, the Alexandrian papacy became a political position in addition to being a religious one, and thus imperial approval was necessary for the legitimacy of any papal election. While imperial approval at the beginning was a mere formality, following the start of the Chalcedonian Schism, it became more and more significant. Since the imperial government for the most part was Chalcedonian, the non-Chalcedonian popes of Alexandria rarely ever received recognition or approval from the emperor, remaining in hiding as fugitives of the law for the majority of their tenures. An example of this can be seen with regards to the election of Pope Peter III, the 27th Patriarch. Another rare occurrence in which the Roman government interfered in favor of the non-Chalcedonian Church of Alexandria was with regards to the appointment of Pope Dioscorus II, the 31st Patriarch. A final example of Roman interference in papal elections can be seen in the election of Pope Theodosius I, the 33rd Patriarch. Following the Arab conquest of Egypt in 639 AD, government approval of papal elections continued to be a formality. Yet in certain unique situations, the government did interfere heavily. An early example of this is the election of Pope Isaac I, the 41st Patriarch. One of the most egregious and well-known elections in which the government interfered is that of Pope Cyril III ibn Latla, the 75th Patriarch. A final example of governmental interference came in the case of John VII, the 77th Patriarch, and Gabriel III, the 78th Patriarch. So, with all of this in mind, we have reviewed the Coptic electoral process, both ancient and modern. As the evidence discussed in this video suggests, the Coptic papal election has been a predominantly democratic tradition. While the methods that have been employed to elect the Patriarch have differed according to historical, political, and social circumstances, remarkably, the principle of reaching a consensus at some level is a common thread among the majority of the 93 patriarchal elections for which we have records. This long-standing Coptic tradition evolved from biblical and apostolic sources as well as from the Church's own sense of orthodoxy and orthopraxy. I truly hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you have enjoyed it, please give it a like. Please also subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when I release more content like this. I have also attached my sources in the description for you to study this subject further. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or corrections, feel free to voice them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and Ogay Chinap Choice.